So we were learning the basic, JavaScript in order to develop React.js application. So far what we have learned, we know how to uh, create an object, an array, and we also know how to restructure the object, and we also know uh, the mutable capability of array. Of course, we also saw a couple of example on how to create a new copy of an array, and also saw some example on how a function can be created. And we also saw some a kind of trivial scenarios, like how we can change the context of the JavaScript object. And finally we landed up creating a class based or class function based approach, and we also inherited a class, and we saw how things behave in ES6 environment, and how we can access the inner elements of the class. So, and of course, I think we also saw one of an example where the JavaScript map, which is a array, each occurrence of or each items of an array will be executed with a function and return a new array. So those are all the examples we saw, and we conclude this JavaScript basic session with this. Anything other than this or any other new concept which will need to be discussed, so I will be talking on the Java React.js itself. And so far, I'm assuming, you are fine with certain basic syntaxes, such as the conditional statement, if else statement, and maybe index based for loop, all sort of thing. I'm just assuming like you're already aware of it, but anyway, if at all required, we would see them in subsequent examples. Now let's get into React.js application development. I already gave an instruction on how to set up Node.js, and have the Node.js installed with the latest Node package manager installed. And React.js we are doing in a couple of ways to integrate uh, the particular React.js capability to our project. But this example, it's going to talk primarily on creating a single page application which has the React.js capability added to it. React.js can also be added to a existing website as a CDN, or maybe you can call it through the script tag, and call the React.js CDN and have the capability added to your website. We will see them whenever it is required, but this particular example which we are going to talk, because we need to make ourselves comfortable with the component, and how the building blocks of React.js work, like the props, state, and going ahead, we are going to talk more on the store, like React Redux, routing capability, those kind of thing we are going to discuss. So I want to get into that particular topic. So I'm going to create a simple a single page application using React.js. React.js has a nice way of, there is a kind of utility where you can have a React.js application, a boilerplate kind of code created for you, which also comes with the Webpack. Mean it adds the building capability and launch it in a browser-based environment. So everything is ready for us in order to kickstart the development. And of course, that's best for us to learn. Easily. We don't need to have a kind of a server kind of environment, or create a build and then install into a kind of a server environment, or to see how the testing works. Okay, I'm going to use that strategy. So now I'm going to create, so sorry, yes, npm init. Make sure your npm is latest, because certain commands will be available in the latest version of npm only. So React app which is a kind of a ID, a kind of command, so which fetches the package from the repositories, and the name of your application at the end. Remember, I am inside a folder. Make sure you are inside a folder where you are going to keep all your React.js application. You're going to treat that as a workspace kind of thing. So here, I'm just going to name it my test app. Make sure the name of the project are lowercase, and of course, and that's what the npm will recommend going ahead. I'm going to hit enter. So it prepares a project for you. As I was talking about, it has all the required dependencies. Of course, if any other further dependencies required, we can add them as a node package, node modules, required modules whenever required. And it also gives us an option to straight away kickstart the development rather than spending too much time on integration. Like we are not actually going to use it in existing projects. It's going to be a pure React.js application. Of course, we can also use a yarn to create and build the project. Of course, that's also a kind of a npm a package manager, so which helps us to create React.js project, and of course, so we can also use yarn to do that. Some example, I'm going to proceed with node npm in order to do it. See, there are plenty of dependencies. Absolutely fine, and of course comes with a webpack. Great. Okay, make sure you have the project created. I also want to get into the project folder. This is very important. Any further commands we are going to test, which has to be executed within the folder of that React.js project. So you have to go inside the project. All we need to start npm start to start the underlying server, and our React.js application will be ready, up and running. So if you see that, it just prepares that into a local host with a port number 3000. Well, it does this kind of compiling, bootstrapping, compiling on all sort of time, and I'm going to see the source code. See that, okay, now we are seeing the welcome screen of our the currently created React.js application. I'm using Visual Studio Code as a editor for my React.js application development. You can choose anything. I mean, there are plenty of editors available. For some reason, I prefer Visual Studio Code, and of course, it's available for Windows and Mac version as well. So let's go and open the folder. See that this is a place I kept my, so it's actually rightly pointing into React.js and my folder. Okay. So to the left we are seeing the certain files and folders, and of course I'm pretty much interested on the src folder, which pretty much sounds as a source code, and we see a couple of things. Okay. So we typically look at the index because that's something the very first file will get loaded. So I'm just going to open this file. I'm going to have a look at it. We see that there are lots of import. So I mean, it's all modules, nothing but the classes declared as modules and being imported. And there are a couple of things, and we see that it has certain global CSS. Of course, as we do on the CSS, we just pretty much same thing we are using. We can expand this section pretty later, and of course, it also comes with something like offline capability. We will come back to that. It's not something we're going to spend too much time with that. The very first line of this particular file, if we, I mean on the coding side, React DOM render, which calls some app, which if you look at it, this tag ends there itself. So it's a kind of uh, tag, and it loads that into root. So there is app. So if you see that there is a app module gets loaded, which is located inside a file called app. So src app. So this is the one, looks like the very first time loaded as soon as React.js application starts to run. Yes, of course, we do notice the logo, read or learn React, and all sort of thing what we are seeing here. So of course, this is what it is. Okay. I'm not going to spend time here, but I'm going to. I prefer to write everything from the scratch. So let's get rid of this. Okay, start from the very beginning. React.js is a component-based application development. Mean every view we prepare as a component. The component wraps the HTML, and as well as I mean the rendering capability is done through the component. I mean the rendering the HTML is done through the component. The component has its own data. Of course, component nothing but a JavaScript. I mean the class what we talked, and of course the React component, which is part of the library, we will inherit it and utilize the properties states available, and in order to create a dynamic view. I'm going to make sure a couple of imports done. To start with, import from, of course, this is the one would be required, and sometime if you see that the import I will be calling directly or with the curly brace. If the particular class declared a default, and that won't require a curly brace, and some class which is not part of default or declared not default will require a curly brace. We'll see them since we start writing. Once we start writing more example, we'll come back and we'll understand it much better. Okay, now I'm going to create a class. I prefer to name it as app, because so the same thing, not necessary to keep the same, but I prefer to keep it as app as of now. Extends React has a class called component. Okay, this is where things will start. Of course, once I start save, for example, for my Mac it's Command S, or for Windows it's Control S. Once I start save it, if you see that it is refreshing, and we also see the live update or as the browser refresh immediately. If you see that there are a couple of contain a default export, it's already telling me some sort of errors. Okay, we'll fix them. And there are a couple of information it's already giving me does not contain a default export. The reason being because the index.js has app which does not have a curly brace, so naturally it is expecting a default class to be declared as a default module. We'll make it. So first thing, if it is a module, there are a couple of conditions. So it's not a normal class anymore because we are treating the classes as a module. So first thing, export keyword, we'll have to make sure the class behave as a module, so that can be imported anywhere. These components are going to contain HTML rendering capability. So wherever I would like to display my view, I would have to make sure that's imported in the required files. So I mean exported, and that could be imported in wherever it is required. And of course the keyword default. So this is what actually it was asking, and we'll see now. Okay, there are other errors have popped up, but fine. So this is what it was expected. A component based approach, of course, the component can be also imported in this way instead of, like, that's also available as can also be done this way because it's also available as a one of non-default module. So it's whatever way, but I'm going to keep it simple because we'll keep it as much simple as possible. We'll add the imports whenever required, or we'll add the modules whenever required. Any React JS component should compulsorily have a function called render. Of course, as I was talking, uh, render is the place where the component should have HTML rendering capability, and at the end it's everything HTML file, so it should have something to display. Render function will of course, it would have a return statement because it is required to return HTML in order to display. So this is the signature. This is must in order to uh, have the component start working. And of course, so it's just we need to conclude whenever I create a component, there should be a render function with a return statement. So without that, there is no point the component will display or do the required thing. And in React.js, we are not going to maintain separate HTML file, and we are going to use JSX in order to display the HTML tags. JSX nothing but JavaScript XML, where we can use the HTML tags straight away within the function statements. And of course, it's like HTML like syntax. There will be slightly different, might be having a slight difference, like certain attribute names might be slightly different, but it is more or less the same HTML what we are going to write. And one thing, we don't need to have any quotation within quotation or anything. I can straight away write HTML anywhere within the React component, within the function. So the JSX syntax can be written anywhere. So say everything hello set. I have a React component ready with a render function, and once I save, we got it. So now a component was created, and the component, this is a component which is bootstrapped. Of course, as we see this index.js file, there is a couple of configuration. We will come back to them. From this particular boilerplate code, we understood this is the app file which gets loaded to the root tag of this particular HTML. Of course, we can even find that HTML in the public folder. You see that there are plenty of dependencies, and if you see that there is a root tag. So within this root tag, our views are going to get loaded. So naturally, our files will be available, or our component views will be available within that. It's going to be dynamically added. So as we see the app.js, what we created with the render function, with the JSX, JavaScript XML, the view is up and running. Fine, absolutely fine. And is this the only one view we are going to keep? Yeah, we can create as many as view within the file or within the external file or anywhere. So let's see, I'm going to create within this src folder, I'm going to create a new file. So I'm going to name a file name. So something, just for example, my component.js. So our intention is to create a new component. So I'm going to add an import as we did before. It's up to you to keep it a default class or something. Okay, let's see. Of course, there should be an export keyword because all components what we create in React.js are going to be a module. So any class what you create should have a prefix export. I prefer to keep the same name for a first class what we create. extends. Of course, if you see that we have already seen inheritance. So React component seems to be having couple of utility functions or capabilities. We haven't implemented constructor though, but anyway, so it has couple of capabilities. Of course, it gives us prepares certain objects ready for us for our subsequent uh, uh, way of adding dynamicity. So we'll come back to them. Of course, I'm going to write the render function. Without the render, there is no way a component would behave or display something. Not only render with the return statement is must. Just hello my component. Okay, so this is a component. How do I display this component? I can display the component in number of ways, but one proper way would be okay. So hello world. So let me make a slightly complex HTML. So div, because there's going to be multiple views, and better we organize wrap everything within the container kind of a structure. So in that, of course, I already had one of a statement saying that hello world, and I can also call the my component straight away as a HTML tag, as a tag. We see that the once I just call this my component, I abruptly entered because it's not going to take any input, and it's not like a kind of blog. I mean, a place where within the tag those contents are going to display. It's a custom component. So I can even complete this way. It's up to us. So open tag and the close tag, but or we can even close this way. Once I add this, we see that the import has happened, and automatically the Visual Studio Code automatically identifying the path. And now if you see that this wait component is within the module is within the curly brace, it is because we haven't declared a default class. So naturally it becomes a kind of optional class. Of course, it has to be within the curly brace. Okay, now once I have this one and save, we're seeing this both outputs. So one is actually the output is coming from the within the h1 tag, and the other one the new component which we created and which is also being rendered over here. So we can create multiple components and render them wherever it is required. It's pretty easy in order to create a dynamic component, load the component, required component, hide the or remove the component which is not required. So we can even create a kind of a dynamic page where we can fill the form, retrieve the list, and edit and delete capabilities. Everything we can do it by dynamically loading them to the React. So if you see that both the thing are loading, okay. But so far what we have been playing on the static side of the component, mean I hard coded those values and values being set and being displayed. It's not only that, the React has more capability. And React component primarily rely on two objects and in order to create and set the values or set the dynamic values or set the value from one component to another. That among two, one is called props. Props, of course, the name is look-alike of properties. So props and state, we would be using these two object types quite extensively. So typically props are kind of an argument passed to React components. Okay, might be, since I'm talking on the concept side, let me explain a bit here. So the my component is displaying this particular text with a hard coded value. What if I want to set the value from this component? Okay, in that case, we are going to require a props uh, like object. So for example, I can straight away create the curly brace within the JSX. See, remember I'm talking curly brace within the JSX. It's a place where we write JavaScript code. I mean, I can call any JavaScript values, objects in order to have it working. So within the curly brace, we'll be writing JavaScript code. Okay, so I'm going to depend on props. See, remember it's a built-in object. So nowhere I'm creating this one props. So I'm going to say um, something value. Okay, okay. Okay, if you feel it is slightly keyword, nothing. I'll just name it as input value something. Okay, once I do it, go here and I can simply make it as an attribution. So input value, which is nothing but is the property of or props object of uh, props property of this my component. So input value, so the same I can set this way. So value passed from app component, like that. So the value whatever I'm passing here will come here and will get displayed within the h3 tag. So let's save them. It's very important to save in order to have see that the output is now we see that hello world, which is actually the app.js is displaying that my component and the value being passed. So I can create, it's like it's being given as an attribution technique. So I can create as many as props and as many as props properties and render them wherever required. Say okay, this is also, let me make it as a slightly complex one. Say next value something, just any name whatever you feel, and we can pass those value. It works. Yes, we see the output. So we can create as many as properties within the this dot props object and have that as a kind of a input value or an attribution way, so that we can pass this value from one component to another. So this component takes the value from this app component and renders those values wherever required. So typically in terms of React.js, props are a kind of argument passed into React component. So it behaves as an argument passed into React component. And one more thing, it is immutable. So the data are kind of like immutable capability. We have seen an object which could be added further. For example, arrays are mutable in JavaScript, so the array can be values can be added. The index will be automatically get adjusted. Immutable data are something which never changes. So just for passing the value, and probably no, it's not going to uh, behave much dynamicity, or within the component it's not going to get changed. So typically a props behave as a argument which is going to be passed into a React component. So this is a one, and it is immutable data. So this is one of an important concept of React.js.